This is Roy Candy from Epic Gaming Night, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the Fantasy 4X game from Gamelin Games, Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea. This copy that I got was a prototype copy, so all the pictures in this preview are going to be prototype pictures, so none of that stuff is final, and all of the little standees that are in the game are all going to be miniatures for the Kickstarter. So make sure to check that out, and let's get to the preview. Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea is a Fantasy 4X game where players will have to explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate to best their opponents. There are 4 different races in the core set. The elves, who are good at casting spells and gaining extra magic from forests and get extra attack while defending forests as well. Dwarves, who are good at collecting resources from mountains, building buildings, and have a lot of special abilities that have to do with building towers. Orcs, who are good at combat with pumped up warriors and peons, and they also are good at raiding their opponents. They can steal resources from them when they win in combat. And then there are humans, which get extra resources in plains, so they can get extra food to help them build peons, and also get points for controlling plains at the end of the game. At the beginning of the game, the first player selects a continent and puts his city capital on there. Then each other player, in turn, selects a different continent that is at least adjacent to one other player. Then you seed the board with all the exploration tokens. Each player will have a faction board showing their faction's abilities, the units they can recruit, the buildings they can build, and the actions they can take. There are 2 categories of actions: command actions, which you can follow your own command action and do a second one by spending a peon, or capital actions, which other players are allowed to follow. Peons are your lower level units that you can use to follow other players' actions and to gather extra resources. First, we'll look at the command actions. March allows you to move any number of units from one location to another location. If you move into an area that has a exploration token, you'll flip that over. And sometimes you can gain resources, or you can come into obstacles that you'll have to pay resources, but you'll get victory points in return. There's also the sail action, which works the same as the march action, but can only be used for your ships. When you go into a new area with an exploration token in the sea, you'll also flip that over and can find things like islands or sea monsters and things like that as well. There are tons of different exploration tokens in the game with all sorts of different abilities, but none seem too detrimental as long as you're properly prepared. The fly action is like sailing, but can only be used for your flying unit. Flying units can't land in water spaces, but can fly from one continent to another. The cast action allows you to cast spells that you've gained using the research action. There are all sorts of different spells in the game, and the ones that say capital on them can only be used when using this action. Whenever you take a command action, you're allowed to immediately follow it with another command action by spending one of your peons from your courtyard and placing it on that command action. Each action can only be taken once during a round, except for March, which there are 2 of on the board. Now let's look at the capital actions. The first one is Recruit. This allows you to build up more units in your force by paying the proper cost associated with that unit. You can even recruit heroes, ships, and flying units after you've built the proper building. Next is the build action, where you can spend ore to be able to build several different buildings. Their buildings are your player board that unlock new special abilities for your faction and new unit types. You can upgrade your capital, which increases its defenses and gives you extra victory points. Towers cost 1 ore per space they are away from your capital, but they also give you a victory point for each space away from your capital, and can be used to move units back and forth because they are considered adjacent to your capital. The next action is Research, which allows you to take the top 3 cards of the magic deck and choose to keep ones equal to your capital level. The next action is Tax, which is a simple way to get a couple extra resources. You'll get resources equal to the number that the resource token is on the tax track. But after everyone is done following, you will immediately move the top resource to the bottom. Whenever any capital action is taken, all the other players are allowed to follow that action by moving one of their peons onto that space from their courtyard. There are 3 different types of resources in the game. Food, which is used for making units. Ore, which is used for building buildings, and magic, which is used for casting spells. You'll gather resources after each player is done taking their 2 actions for the round. You gather resources for each area you control, and then you'll get extra resources for each peon at area up to the limit. This field gives the dwarves 2 food, while this field with 2 peons gives them 3. Combat happens whenever you march units into an area controlled by an enemy unit. Each player will add up the strength of all of their units in combat. Peons have 1 strength, warriors have 2, and then your heroes will have different strengths depending on the hero. Then each player will select a tactic card. Tactic cards have all sorts of different abilities with a paper, rock, scissors-ish mechanic. If they pick one tactic, maybe your tactic will work better against it, and you have to pay resources for the tactic you select if you're the winner of the combat. After the tactic cards are selected, you'll total up your side's strength. The side with the higher strength wins, ties go to the defender, and then the winner must pay the resources and gain victory points off of their tactic card. The heroes you can recruit can add all sorts of different abilities in combat and around the board, depending on your capital level. The game ends when one of the 4 in-game conditions is met. All the exploration tokens have been discovered, all of the peons and warriors of one player are on the board, all of the towers of one player are on the board, or you have eliminated the capital city of one of the players. Then you tally up in-game scoring. You get points for units on the board at the end of the game, for buildings that you've built, whether it be capital cities, towers, or buildings on your player board, and then magic spells you've cast during the game, whether it be in combat or with the cast action. And then for combats you've won, you gain points equal to the points on the card. You can also gain points for exploration tokens by overcoming obstacles that you face. You can also gain points depending on your faction's special abilities. Different factions will have affinities for different types of land or different areas. You also gain a point for each area your units control on the board. Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea feels like a true 4X game as you explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate your opponents in a fantasy world. So that's Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea. There's a couple of awesome things about this game. The fact that it's a 4X game that gives you that full 4X feel of exploring, expanding, exploiting, and exterminating in a fraction of the time that a lot of these other games do. I'm a really big fan of huge, epic games, and this one makes you have some of those epic feels in a tighter package. It normally takes like 2 hours to play the game, and that's with playing with people that don't know the game super well, so you can get the game done in a lot quicker time than some other games. There's all sorts of different special abilities on all the different factions and different faction cards, and I know that they're going to be adding more races to the Kickstarter as well. The undead and the lionkin and the lizard folk and goblins, so there'll be even more options to make the asymmetrical play even more pronounced in the game as you choose the different faction that you want to play. And I'm always a fan of that in any of these civilization games. Picking the civilization that I'm going to play is one of the parts that's really exciting for me. I'm really excited to see how all the miniatures look on the board. I played the game with these little standees, and I really enjoyed the game playing with all that stuff, but the cardboard towers and stuff, you get to put these awesome miniatures on top of those. So I'm really excited to see how all of the miniatures look in the game when it's the full complete package, which is super exciting for me. I definitely enjoyed lots of aspects of this game. I also really love the follow action for those capital actions. The fact that one player can choose an action, then I can follow it, and it actually ends up, since not all of the capital actions are normally taken every single turn depending on the number of players, it leads to some negotiation. There will be rounds where I'd be like, hey man, if you tax, then I will do the build phase, or maybe I'll tax and then you do the build phase, so that way we can get some extra resources, that we can do another thing that we really want to do, and it adds for more table talk and working together with certain people to be able to try to get the actions done that you need for your civilization. Combat is another one which is really cool. The fact that it's based on the strength of your units, so if you have more people, you're more likely to win the combat, but then you have to try to outthink your opponent on which card they're going to play. It's well, I know they might play a barricade, so maybe I should play this card that counters that, or maybe I'm going to play a card that allows me to bring extra units into the combat. Because I'm currently at one of my tower, I can bring some guys from my capital in, but if they play the card that completely cancels that, that'll just negate the strength off of that. So there's this back and forth mind games of what are they going to play, so what should I play, which actually makes the combat engaging and completely diceless, so there's no real luck. You're just trying to outplay your opponent, which is really cool as well. But yeah, I think altogether, this game definitely gives you what it's set out to do, be a shorter time frame for X game. It's not super tiny. It definitely gives me that tiny Epic Kingdoms feel, but on a much larger scale with lots of crazy powers. But it's kind of crazy because this is the first Gameling game without Epic in the title, but it definitely feels like it's the most epic. Thanks so much for checking out my preview of Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea. It's definitely a game I'm looking forward to getting to the table a lot more. Make sure to check out my podcast. It's Epic Gaming Night. We talk about lots of thematic games and lots of games we're excited about. It's about the stories and relationships that board games create, so make sure to check that out. I also do reviews over on the Dice Tower. Look at those, and make sure to hit us up on our social media at Epic Gaming Night. We'll see you guys next time.